Welcome back, everyone, to R2Kast number 95. This is actually the second time trying this. I had a bit of an issue with my internet. Don't know what happened, but anyway, here we are. It's working now. Quite exciting being at level 95. Fairly flying through podcasts. I think only a couple of years ago we started, almost at that 100. And as I said in the last episode, we have a bit of an announcement coming on the 100th ep. I am not going to give you any more clues than you already have. You're going to have to go back to R2Kast number 94 to find the clue I have given you. 94, obviously, with Holly Thompson, who was the creator of In the Country magazine, which you probably have heard of if you're on Instagram in the ag space here and there, or the sort of rural space, I should say. It was really cool to talk to her about that. In the Country has now finished, but she has some exciting things coming up that she was talking about, which was really cool to hear. 96, so the next episode after today's is going to be with Rhys Jones. Rhys has started a PT business sort of based over Instagram called Cattle Strength. Sort of looking at a quite, what would you say, out there diversification, if you will. So that was a cool episode coming there. But today we have an episode that could maybe, let's say, claim you back some money from the government. So you're probably already listening, thinking, "Oh, what can I do here? Can I get some more cash into the business?" And I'm not going to try and say the fancy terms and the fancy things that are involved, because I'll just hugely embarrass myself. I'm going to pass that on to today's guest. But before that, Thorfinn, would you like to say hello?
Hi, Wallace. Thanks very much for having me. Apologies in advance that I'm not going to be nearly as interesting as your guest before or guest after. But, hopefully it's some value to some of you listeners, so I'll do my best.
Just before we get started with another episode of the R2Kast, I would like to thank our primary sponsors, A-Plan Rural. A-Plan Rural are heavily involved on the social media scene in the ag space with 120,000 followers on Instagram. They use this following to host social media takeovers with farmers throughout the country to showcase their stories. They also post to their rural community blog with further stories about these people in the industry. On top of this, they like to support initiatives that are championing the British agricultural industry, such as myself. So thank you to A-Plan Rural for that.
I highly doubt that that's not the case. I'm sure it'll be very interesting, and I'm sure if people are listening and thinking they can make a bit of cash, that's going to keep them interested in itself, isn't it? But before we get into that, Thorfinn, I always sort of like to hear about people's stories and who they are and what's led them to where they are. Could you tell us a bit about what a younger you was doing? What was the intentions, and what did you see happening in the future?
I mean, that is a question I'm not prepared for at all, but I'll do my best. I mean, my career-wise has jumped all over the place, and I have landed in R&D after just finding myself very closely aligned with it. I was running businesses for 10, 12 years before I ended up doing this, and within at least one of those businesses, there was a fairly big R&D claim to make, so I had to learn about all of that, and that's how I've ended up here. But aside of that, it's I'm a London boy that moved to Norfolk, discovered the rural ways, and very much better for it. And again, along with my experience with the R&D scheme, that's sort of why I've ended up where I have in terms of specialising in agriculture, because I live out here. These are the people you sort of see and work with every day, and the two worlds collided to leave me where I am.
And where you are today is sort of based in agriculture. Was that the first sort of time you came into this sector?
No, I'd been doing R&D claims before that. Our claims were more to do with engineering. But as we'll cover, the R&D scheme is not industry specific. It can be within any industry across the board. I just came to agriculture because in moving out here and knowing a couple of farmers out in the area, ended up doing some work with a couple of them. And the more work I did, the more I realized this was something that applied to a lot of people. And it's a hugely underutilized scheme. And in an industry, farming and agriculture is not exactly in a good way at the moment, financially speaking. There seems to be a lot of support missing. prices are going up. It's a difficult landscape at the moment. So the worse it gets for farming, the more people tended to find their way to me, because this is a relatively unknown source of funding.
So, and you mentioned it's a sort of unknown source of funding. I had no idea what it was until you got in touch, and it was really interesting to hear that, because you're talking about funding streams. We're moving into a complete period of uncertainty regarding subsidy. What are we getting next? Is the UK going to support the rural sector like EU did? I am someone that struggles to see, one, how they could, and two, if they could, how high on the sort of priorities list that is. So finding alternative income streams, whether that's savings, extra income, whatever, is an important thing for farmers. And when we're talking about R&D, we're talking about research and development, but what does that mean? Where can money come from that perspective? When you're talking about this scheme, tax relief scheme, tell the viewers and tell me what that actually means.
Okay. I mean, that's a big question.
I assume it is, yeah.
I'll do my best to pick it apart. Basically, it's a government scheme. So where you hear politicians, and I'll try not to get into politics, but where you hear politicians saying things like, we're leveling up the economy, we're helping innovation in Britain, we're growing, small, medium-sized businesses, all the rest of that. A lot of that boils down to, okay, great, that sounds good as a soundbite. How are you doing that? And the R&D scheme is probably the main way that governments get to do that. So it's a scheme that awards companies, as I said, in any sector, for trying to seek advances in an area of science or technology. And that already sounds like, yeah, okay, great. If you're a rocket scientist, you're working in a lab, you're creating the newest form of cancer treatment or whatever, great, that applies to you. But actually, when you pick and you go through the legislation, you discover just how many different people, how many different businesses this applies to. Any sort of advance being sought is potentially qualifying, and that being sought bit is really important, because it doesn't need to be successful. It just needs to be sought. You need to be working on trying to do something, and if it doesn't work, if you fail along the way, you can still just as readily as someone who's succeeded.
So you might have noticed the screen's maybe jumped a little bit there. I apologise. I randomly just did a coughing fit, so I've edited that out. No one wanted to hear that. Thorfinn was just saying there that it doesn't have to be successful. So that's an interesting thing. So are you able to free up money? That's maybe the wrong term, and tell me if it is, to just look at changing something for your business, whether that's technical based, or looking at it, utilizing science or whatever here and there, and even if that isn't actually going to better the business, you're still able to source that money. Is that what you kind of mean?
Yes, potentially. And I use that word quite a lot, because there's always a subjectivity to R&D claims. It's a judgment call every time, a judgment call that you might make yourself, a judgment call that I might make sitting in my seat, or my equivalent in a different part of the country, the judgment call at HMRC as well. And there's all sorts of guidelines and legislation governing, what is and what isn't R&D, but there's also a lot of subjectivity to it. So there is a judgment call to be made. So, when you ask a question like that, the answer is, it depends. In a lot of situations, yes. In some situations, no.
So I'm going to ask you a question following up on that. What is R&D then? What classes has it?
All right. Now that is a good question. It's another big question, but let's sort of start at the top. So R&D is, it stands for research and development. So, that can involve an awful lot of things. It can involve academic research, finding out what the existing state of play, the benchmark in your industry might be for anything, for a product that you're producing, for a process that is part of your business, or a service that you provide. R&D for tax purposes is slightly different, and I won't go into too much detail on that because it would bore you to tears. But effectively, R&D for tax purposes is the seeking of an advance in an area of science or technology where there is a significant amount of scientific or technological uncertainty, and you utilize competent professionals in their relevant industry to overcome those uncertainties. And and the solutions to those uncertainties are not publicly available or readily deducible by a competent professional, which is a lot of words, and you probably want that broken down somehow.
Well, I was going to say that second part's interesting, not publicly available, but what I was going to say, you said you probably want that broken down. You would be correct. What could you give us, I guess, an example that might make it a bit easier to understand?
Yeah. Okay. So what all of that means, it's a really good way of explaining this is just in a couple of sort of case studies and examples. So, for example, you have got the people who are doing textbook R&D that might well exist in a lab or somewhere like that, where they're looking at, for example, trying to improve the efficacy of a cancer drug. They have a hypothesis. They go and formulate some chemicals, whatever they do. They test them on various tissues, possibly animals, maybe humans. They work out whether it works or not. Then they go back to the drawing board if it doesn't work. They come out eventually with an answer to the question they were looking to, the advance they were looking to seek. Maybe it's a no. Maybe they do 2 years worth of trials, and actually at the end they've produced this amazing drug, but it has it destroys you from the inside and ends up being worse than cancer itself. So that whole bit of research is a write-off. They can't do anything with it. The science goes no further. But they could still make a claim because they were attempting to make these advancements. There was nothing out there to suggest that this particular advancement was or was not going to be successful. Another person who's working in cancer treatments had no idea whether the work they were going to do was going to be successful or not. If someone's already done it 1,000 times and another scientist could come along and say, look, that's not going to work because look here, there's this case study over there where they were trying pretty much exactly the same thing. It didn't work. If someone was to then go on and do the same work, get the same result, then they might not have an R&D claim because you could say that actually in the public domain, there's another industry professional who knows all this stuff. What you're doing has been done before, doesn't count. In a more relevant example, for our audience, for an agricultural business, you might find that you're looking at soil quality, for example. It's quite well documented that the UK has got an issue with soil quality in significant parts of the country because our intensive farming process has damaged the soil quality over however many hundreds of years. And Michael Gove made a big speech in 2018 where he talked about there only being 30 to 40 harvests left before all of the good stuff in our soil is gone, and you're not going to get a huge amount more out of it. So a farmer who is actively trying to restore the quality of his soil and in doing it in a way that is measurable. So might be taking soil samples for their level of organic content, might just be measuring earthworms, might be compaction, something along those lines. They don't know what the result of their actions are going to be. They've got an idea. They also don't know if that increase in organic matter that they might be able to generate over 10 years, for example, is actually going to have any effect on the farming whatsoever. Most farmers would like to think that if they do something positive to the soil, eventually you're going to get an improvement in yield with a drop in synthetic nitrogen being applied, for example. But it's uncertain, and it takes such a long time in the farming world, because, you only get 40, 45 tries at doing something in your life. You might start farming at 20. There you go. That's 45 attempts, because each one you do once a year.
And from what Michael Gove said, someone who is 20 starting at the minute, they'll be approaching the end of what we have. Now, I don't know how true I believe that is, but I know that was said. But it's an interesting point. I think to look at it, I'm just trying to make it make sense, because I know I'm getting bits. So the questions I'm asking are basically the parts I'm not understanding and assuming that they're the same. So let's take the soil example. Let's say there's someone listening out there thinking, well, I'm in that exact position. Nitrogen's went through the roof. I know it's came down slightly lately, but we never know what's going to be next. Are we able to sort of continue producing a product, whether that's grass or crops, at the same yield we have been without nitrogen, or at least somewhat close? Looking into the soil is that thing to do. What would be next for them? Let's say they're looking at trying to free up some money here to try and to put towards research and development. What would be their next move?
I would just like to quickly interrupt the show for a minute to give you some extra information on our primary sponsors, A-Plan Rural. A-Plan offer bespoke cover for farms and estates the UK over, and will give you tailored insurance for anything on the farm, from your old workhorse tractor that's been around 20 years or a fancy new and exciting diversification.
Well, I'd say the first thing to do is we've actually got like a sort of survey that you can take. It takes about 2 or 3 minutes. I think there's a link in the podcast description somewhere.
There will be, yeah, there will be.
That's your best way, because, I mean, as I said, there's it depends answers to so many questions, and maybe this, maybe that. The only way that you're going to get a definitive answer about whether you're doing R&D is answering a bunch of questions on a survey, and someone, it might be myself, might be one of my colleagues, takes your answers, had a look, and then gets in contact and says, okay, talk me through this. Let me know what you're doing. Let me know what kind of work you've been undertaking, how it's gone, and you get an answer that way. But for today, the things that you might do, it's all going back to those original qualifying criteria for R&D. So if you've done a bit of work that you think, what, that was really, it's technically, scientifically quite difficult. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. It's a measurable thing that I'm trying to improve. And I've got an idea for what I want to do, how I want to do it, but I don't know how it's going to go. You go back to, is there an advance you're seeking? So let's say it is crop yield. I mean, that's a really good advance. Being able to grow, extra tonnage of wheat, for example, out of a hectare. That's a really great advance. No one at HMRC is going to argue that an improvement in food production is a big tick. With security down, nationwide food security being an issue, with the war being an issue, with the imports of wheat, for example. I think the prices shot up over here because there was so little coming. With the subsidies all being cut out, farmers are going to need all the help they can get. So if you can improve yield, that's good for the farmers, it's good for the industry, good for the consumer, good for the industry.
Well, that's interesting, because I was wondering sort of how, because we're talking about, at the end of the day, farmers producing food, we've got to consider it as a business. But I was wondering if there was not a social side, but like a, like what you're saying, does increasing sort of food security, does that play in their favour? So that's interesting to hear. Is there like a more than business and research and development benefit side to it? There's almost like a global benefit or national benefit, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, so another example, a really good example for the industry is, going net zero. It's sustainability, it's ecology, all of those things. Again, everyone knows that the farming process has always been quite intense, and it's got a few issues with it. Things like nitrogen leaching, because in the current economic climate, the safest thing a farmer can do to get a decent yield is get a load of synthetic nitrogen onto their crop. It goes directly into the crop. Generally speaking, that isn't uptaken in the soil in the same way that organic fertilizer would be. So once you start getting below a certain level of nitrogen per hectare, your yield just drops off a cliff. Any farmer that's experimented with levels of synthetic nitrogen on a crop will have experienced this, that, you get 80% of what you're going to get with the first 100 kilos, I think it is.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And beyond that, it's just incremental. Even though nitrogen's gone up quite a lot in cost, if you're too frugal with your nitrogen, your yield takes a massive hit, and no farmer can afford a massive hit on their yield at the moment. Which means that the answer is generally excess nitrogen, and excess nitrogen causes problems in the waterways and all the rest of that. So so back to your question, there is a really good angle for sustainability at the moment. So even if it is just process, your farming process is doing more or less the same thing, but you're finding a way of doing it in a more sustainable way in this big drive towards net zero. That is an advance. It's a measurable scientific advance. If you can say, look, we're using per hectare, we're emitting less CO2 in our practices. We've reduced the amount of machinery usage because we've done something clever. Then all of those are scientific advances in your farming process. So that ticks that first box.
I'm trying to sort of think, I know quite a lot of my listeners are livestock based. I'm trying to sort of think of examples that would come in that side of things. Would that be like, using, for example, true test readers to increase efficiency over the course of a production year? Would that count because it's already a product, or would that not count?
That's a good question. That's a really good question, and we come across this a lot in the R&D world. Basically, if somebody is using a product the way it was intended and getting a fairly predictable result, that's not R&D.
Okay.
For example, there's a big conversation about variety trials. Might be trialing one variety of wheat over another. Now the producer of that seed might be saying, look, this is going to do way better than Zayat or Graham or whatever you're growing against. Try this out. It'll be fantastic. And you go, okay, well, I might get 15% better yield on this with this particular variety. You try it, and it absolutely bombs. You've got an argument that there is R&D there on the other because it's quite an active process. But for something that's a little bit more of a passive process, like, I don't know if you know about CIPC getting banned not too long ago.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but
so it's
about it. Okay, yeah.
So it's predominantly used for storage of vegetables, particularly potatoes. So people use CIPC to stop them from sprouting when they're in storage. And it got banned a couple of years ago, and people have been looking for all sorts of alternatives to CIPC, including things like mint oil. And there was another product that was released, and right now that I need it, I can't remember what it was called. It's an acronym, it's a 3-letter acronym. EF something or other. Anyway, that got used and it destroyed a certain variety of potato.
Okay.
It's not R&D, because all they did was apply it to the potatoes that went in storage and watch them just disintegrate. So, got sold for animal feed or whatever. So, they might have made 5% what they would have made on the market potatoes. But that is not R&D because it's not an active process. It's literally just sticking one chemical on instead of a different one, and it went wrong.
Had they done that and measured I'm guessing this is at a storage so that the potatoes don't rot. They have a longer time in storage. That's what it's been used for. Had they measured the duration they stayed in storage at an acceptable level, would that then be R&D?
Probably not, because it would be it would be publicly available
knowledge that.
So again, you all of the questions that you or any listener has in their mind, if you go back to those first couple of criteria that I said in one long raid, those are the things to test against in your mind. So is there a scientific or technological advance of sort? That's the first one. Is there significant uncertainty, scientific or technological uncertainty? Is there a readily deducible solution or a publicly available solution to it? And what did you use competent professionals in undertaking the work, in looking to seek that advance? So just going back to that question you asked me about, using with your dairy farmers, using a tool to measure something. If that tool is doing what it's supposed to do, then them using it is not R&D. But it could be that they're looking at a new process to, I don't know, improve the gut health of their herd or something like that. So they're modifying the feed that they're giving their herd. At the same time, they're doing this, they're doing that, they're testing. Maybe they're using something like that to be able to give them a readout on whether what they've done has been successful or not. So that's fine. And any time they have spent using that product in order to give them the answer they're looking for would be qualifying time, but just using the product probably wouldn't be on its own.
That makes sense. So let's say someone's done this, the survey, and it seems like they are eligible. What's the next step?
Next step is, so we would then have a conversation. So we'd work out, right, what is your R&D, or what is the work you've done that you think would be R&D? One important thing to mention at this point is you go back up to 2 years. This is a retrospective activity, an R&D claim. So you're looking at this from a completed financial year perspective. So you go, okay, I've done my accounts, they're all submitted, all the rest of that. Then you have a look at it and you go, right, what was the work I was doing in that time? Did I do anything that I reckon might hit these criteria? If I did, how much did I spend on that work? How much did I spend on staff? How much did I spend on subcontracted work? How much did I spend on inputs or other consumables, including things like diesel, by the way?
Right.
There's all sorts of qualifying costs. You've got a lot of non-qualifying costs, but again, if we spent time talking about that, we'd probably be here for a while. But you have a look at what you've spent. You pull together those two things. So you pull together the qualifying expenditure and you say, right, this is what I've spent in that period, in that one financial period or two financial periods, however far you're looking back. This is the work that I've done. And you've then got to articulate what work you've done, how it hits the legislative criteria that HMRC require, and how the costs relate to that. And that is a process that's not particularly easy. And that is why people like me exist, because this is what we do. This is all we do. We just do R&D claims. So, we're very au fait with the process with HMRC. We know what we need to be doing. And it's one of the things, while I'm sitting here in my job, and, this is what I do day in, day out, 52 weeks a year. In my previous life as a business owner, it would have been nice to have been able to do this all by myself without any help. The fact is, this is a complicated scheme. And whilst I'm probably doing a terrible job of trying to make it sound a bit more simple and straightforward and explaining it, it's still complicated. And there's no way around it.
I think the truth is that's why you're here. Yeah, that's why.
That is why I'm here. Trying to write a technical report that hits all the criteria that HMRC need to hit it speaking in the language that they want to be reading,
Yeah.
making sure you're allocating qualifying expenditure only, excluding all non-qualifying expenditure, is so difficult from a business owner's perspective. You know, it's like trying to suddenly be a lawyer overnight. Just suddenly being a tax expert overnight doesn't happen. You'd spend months and months and months trying to work out what you're allowed to claim for, what you're not allowed to claim for, how you write it up, what HMRC want to see, what they don't want to see. And that's the bit we do. So we do all of that heavy lifting. So we ascertain whether you've got a claim. We have a look at the numbers, whether you've got HMRC for you, for your listeners. We write the tech report, we submit that at the same time.
And so is it purely retrospective? Is there no sort of, I've got a plan to do this, or is it both?
That is an excellent question. So it's always a retrospective idea to actually do, but when you're proactive about making a claim, you're going to be doing work that's going to involve an R&D claim in future, you can do a much better job. So the problem with retrospective claims, if you might have someone who's listening now who thinks, actually, I did do this stuff. It was really complicated. I was trying this. Whether or not it worked is largely irrelevant. But actually, that would be quite good. The problem with that is you then need to go back, anything up to best part of 3 years and go, right, okay, what was I doing back then? What was this cost for? How much of that was actually related to the R&D work versus something else? How much of my diesel bill could I possibly allocate to R&D versus farming as usual? So doing it retrospectively is the way you have to do it, functionally. But if you're planning your R&D in advance, you can come up with a hypothesis that you want to test. You can make notes on how much time you've spent, how much time your staff have spent, what inputs are going in. You can be really accurate with your costs. And HMRC increasingly are wanting businesses to do this, to have a proactive plan about what they're intending to do, and then running through it against that plan. Obviously the plan will change partway through the year, but that's fine as well. HMRC they accept it now, but they're going to accept it, increasingly less going forward is retrospective estimations of your time and your expenditure and stuff. They much rather see really accurate allocation of costs, which are recorded, justifiable, all the rest of that.
It makes sense, in fairness. It makes sense. I'm probably going to ask the question that everyone listening is thinking. How much money have people been able to claim?
I hope you've kicked your feet up and got comfy and enjoying another fantastic episode of the R2Kast with another really interesting guest. I would just like to quickly take another second to plug the sponsors of the show today, the Scottish Farmer, and I would strongly advise you to go out and pick one up this week and see even more of the fantastic people that are in our industry. Yeah,
another good question. Are you really knocking them out at the moment?
Thanks. I have no idea what I'm talking about.
And this is it. It's, I get far too carried away with the detail of all this. And it's so nerdy these last couple of years, digging into the legislation, all the guidelines, thinking, that's interesting. That's really cool. But then you forget, about what ordinary business owners want to know. Short answer, an average claim is worth a little over 50k per year, which is a decent amount of money for most UK businesses. Given that often the profit levels of a farm in the UK are less than that can effectively, more than double your profit for a year if you're that size of business. Depending on the size of the business, that number will be up or down. I've got farming clients who've claimed 100k plus per year. I've got other farming clients who claim 15k per year. So it depends on the scale of the business, also the level of the R&D. You know, I've got one. Don't know if you heard of Heathcote Farms.
Yes, I know the person's name as well. That's annoying.
Sorry,
I know the person's name as well. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but
that's all right. Well, maybe he wouldn't want his name mentioned, but they're a really, really interesting farm. They do loads and loads and loads of trials, and then they do this meet with local farmers and local growers, where they're able to showcase all the results in a much more significant way than you might get from, you know, sort of lab results of crop A versus crop B, you know, really controlled small scale trials. These are, you know, this is what they've done over hectares and hectares and dozens of trials. And they do all this as, it's almost like a philanthropic exercise.
Yeah.
You know, they're growing all this stuff purely to see what works and what doesn't. And they're a really good candidate for R&D. And I was very surprised that they hadn't already made an R&D claim, because they're such a textbook candidate for R&D. But it just goes to show how poorly understood this whole scheme is. You know, there was some survey done by the Federation of Small Businesses recently that said only 5% of eligible businesses are optimizing their tax relief, which is mind-blowing.
That is, yeah.
I mean, agricultural claims are less than 1% of the claims made in the UK. It's mostly software. But, you know, you speak to just about any farmer and they're doing different interesting things. You know, they're aware that they've got to get their sustainability creds in order. They're aware that organic matter in the soil has got to be improved. Otherwise, that, you know, they're going to be cutting off their own nose in a couple of years. You know, they're aware that they've got all these restrictions with chemicals getting banned, you know, different processes getting banned. And they're sort of trying to figure out how you go about overcoming all this stuff at the same time as making a profit, where, you know, input costs are massively up. The prices, you know, we've got inflation that's out of control at the moment. So prices are getting hammered. Everyone wants to keep prices down to stop inflation from going up. And that sits with the farmer, keeping his costs under control so that he doesn't have to charge it all on to the supermarkets, whoever's selling his stuff.
So it's funny you mentioning interest rates. We were having a bit of a laugh on last week's podcast. Holly is kind of looking at buying a house. And she's like, I just can't afford it with interest rates at the minute. And I felt a wee bit bad saying it. I got my flat at 1.58%, so I was winning on that one. You mentioned some people are claiming at 100k per year, some are at 10 to 15k per year. When you say per year, is that if you're carrying out these trials, you can continue to claim for as long as you do so? Or what do you mean by that?
So short answer is yes, you can. Long answer is always go back to the qualifying criteria. Are you still seeking an advance? Is there still scientific uncertainty that you're trying to overcome? Is any of it readily deducible by a competent professional, or has it become publicly available knowledge? As long as you continue to hit those criteria, you can continue to make a claim. And I mean, the great and frustrating thing about agriculture and farming is that often these things take years and years and years. You know, you might attempt to improve the organic matter in your soil this year. Next year, your readout is going to be almost exactly the same. In 10 years, maybe you'll get some measurable data, but that's fine. You're continuing to seek the advance. It just takes, 10 years is 10 iterations, which in a lot of companies might take them a couple of months. In farming, it's ages because it's one harvest a year for whatever you're trying to do.
That's sort of one extra thing that's maybe made sense to me in the last few minutes. I never realised this. So when I first heard about this, it more made sense to me that, you might get a successful claim, grand, you get 10k, you get 100k, you get 50k, whatever. But there's actually sort of scope for you to almost generate income out of this. A sort of, not a secure continuous income, but you can actually, if you're continuing to research, if you're continuing to look for advancements and look for, not strictly find, you can claim that money.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, this scheme is not going anywhere. You know, a lot of clients I speak to are like, oh, is it suddenly going to disappear? You know, what do we do then? It's like, this is not going anywhere. You know, this has been around for 23 years already. You know, and it still blows my mind that not more people know about it, because it's been going for that long. You know, other countries even within the EU have got much better R&D. You know, I say better, they're investing much more heavily in their own R&D, you know, sort of feedback economy than we are, but it's not going anywhere. This is one of the drivers to economic growth in this country. So, and even though Jeremy Hunt recently reduced the level of support in one small section of the scheme, he's also improved it elsewhere. There's talk of legislation in the future which is actually going to be quite beneficial for it. The other thing is the corporation tax rate has just gone up, and given that the R&D scheme works against corporation tax, when your corporation tax goes up, the level of your R&D benefit goes up. So it's not going anywhere, and you don't want to sort of you don't game the system, so you don't sort of try and shoehorn stuff into being a qualifying R&D project if it's not, because an HMRC inspector would see right through it. We wouldn't work with sort of an R&D project that smelt a little bit iffy. But the positive thing to do, and the whole reason this scheme exists, is because the government wants businesses to be investing in R&D, in systems, in processes and products that are genuinely going to be improvements in their areas of science or technology. So if you're sitting there thinking, okay, you know, I don't think I'm doing anything at the moment or have done in the last couple of years that could be R&D qualifying, but actually I've been thinking about. One bit of information that encourages to take that step, and that is what government wants out of it.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, it's in their best interest as well, especially looking at farming. So I came into this, Thorfinn, having no idea what we were talking about, and you seem to have this idea that you weren't going to put it over. I think you put it over pretty well.
You're too kind.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't say that if I didn't. I've had folk on that have sort of came on to promote a thing or a service or whatever, and they've explained it. But an hour in, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not how this feels. It feels genuinely like a thing that probably some of my listeners will be able to take advantage of. Now, Thorfinn mentioned throughout that there'll be a link in the description. There will be. So click on that link, try that survey, see what happens, see if you are eligible. I don't know, I'm not allowed to give out your details, Emma. That's not how it goes. Once you do the survey, will they get put onto you? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, the other thing to say is, you know, that you might not, if you're listening, you might not think this applies to you, but you might well know another business, another farmer, another, you know, I mean, it could be any sector as well. It's not just farming. I know that's the context we're talking about today, but this applies to everything. You know, all the textbook businesses like software, pharmaceuticals, etc. But it's manufacturing, it's engineering, it's construction, it's growing. Any industry has potential to make an R&D claim, not just farming. As long as you hit those criteria, you're seeking an advance in science or technology, there's uncertainty in what you're doing. It's not readily deducible by a professional or in the public domain.
So what about researching into utilisation of social media as a betterment for an industry as a whole? Because that's what I'm doing. Don't know if I'd be able to feel money that way.
Yeah, maybe we have a call offline after this. But you know what, go ahead and fill out the form. Because,
yeah, exactly.
You know, if you can articulate an advance in an area of science or technology there's reasonable scientific or technological uncertainty in what you're doing. There's measurable, ways of testing whether what you're doing is going to have an effect or not, and the knowledge isn't already out there. There are a couple of restrictions. So, for example, you're looking at areas of applied science as opposed to theoretical science only, although the legislation may start to include theoretical science as well. So pure maths is going to be included in the next year. So things are changing, and you just never know.
Well, I mean, if you're asking if I could articulate that, I can barely articulate my McDonald's order. So that's definitely where you come in. But yeah, if you are listening and it is of interest, check out the survey, which I'll put the link to in the description. Whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever, that should all be there. If you follow me on R2K, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, well, I mean TikTok, I guess, but I'm probably not going to put it there. Instagram and Facebook, I will have the descriptions there as well when I post about having a chat with Thorfinn, and also when I post about it coming out. But, well, first off, Thorfinn, is there anything we've missed regarding R&D?
I mean, loads, but, we've only got as much time as we've got. I don't think we've missed any. There's way more examples of other businesses that are doing R&D. There's way more reasons why, people have never heard of R&D, don't think it applies to them. They've got an accountant that has sort of put them off the idea or whatever. There's a lot of other stuff we could talk about, but I think, we've only got a certain amount of time, and your listeners have only got so much patience.
Well, I think all the information's there, isn't it? If it appeals to someone, they think they're going to be eligible, they can get in touch. And for those that don't think it's eligible, maybe just want to hear about it, we've probably covered everything that needs to be covered. Yeah. So
yeah, I think there's an option to book a call with me.
Okay.
There's an option to take this survey.
I'll put the link in the description to survey, which is what Candice has sent me, and I think there's also your contact details. I can't remember exactly how it works.
Yeah, okay. I mean, hopefully that can go in the description on the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll put that.
Just the bottom line is, if you're thinking about it, if you're wondering if this applies, just find out. Give us a shout, drop us a line. Do some more research if you like. But I'm very happy to talk to anyone all day long about this, as you can probably tell. And there's no obligation or anything like that. So my big objective is just to get the word out, because I've been in the business owner's shoes. I know what it's like to struggle financially. I know how much of a reprieve this was for me to find out that this existed. It did apply, and it was worth about 60, 70 grand to me as a business for every year for about 3 or 4 years, which was huge. So getting this support to the businesses that need it is what I'm all about.
There is, however, 2 questions that I ask everyone at the end of every podcast. One of them is going to be quite interesting for you, in fairness. I don't know how you're going to answer it. The first one is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Which I think is fine. I think that's quite an easy question for everyone. But the second one is, if you had any tips for folk coming into your industry, what would they be?
All right, hold on. So I might ask her. So 5 years, I very much hope I'm doing exactly what I'm doing now. And I know that's a really boring answer.
No, it's not.
This job, the job I'm in, is great. I'll get to work with so many interesting people doing so many interesting things. They're so grateful that I've been able to bring this to them as well. The number of people who go, when I first started speaking to you, I thought you were some sort of wizard, that, this could possibly be true. How is it that I've been going without 50K every year just because I didn't know about this? That can't be true. And then they see the benefit, they see the money land in their bank, and they're like, okay, so you weren't just full of BS this entire time. I was like, no, this was real. This was true. This was a back scheme. Aren't you glad you answered my call that first day? So it's great. And this job it's a great job. This scheme is fantastic. So, I really hope I'm still doing this in 5 years' time and helping a lot more businesses. Your other question? What was it again?
If you had tips for folk coming into your industry, what would they be? And I'd say focus on your job. That'll be really interesting.
As someone else coming into the R&D industry?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Don't do it if you are not committed to the detail.
Okay.
If you are a bit like me, a proper nerd who loves going through spreadsheets, digging through transaction history, chronicling everything, and doing a lot of hard work so that the person that you're trying to do it for doesn't have to. That's the bit that I enjoy, massively detail-oriented. And if you're not, don't touch this with a barge pole, because if HMRC start asking questions and you don't have the answers, it is not a good place to be. But if you are wanting to do this and that is your mindset, you're interested in helping small businesses, you're interested in helping people do innovative stuff, then, get involved. Feel free to give me a call because, I might be able to get you a job.
Oh, excellent. There we are. Job offer and everything. I do like the spreadsheet side, but I wouldn't like the rest, I'll be honest. I think there's a reason people like you exist, and it's very helpful. Making folk money, and what more could you ask for? But no, here, listen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. It's been an education.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, apologies if any of that was unclear. I massively talk too much, but you only get to go on a podcast every so often.
No, I think you hit the points absolutely perfect. I wouldn't have heard it too much. You probably heard the odd cough here and there because it didn't really disappear straight away. I was lucky I had some lozenges sitting in my drawer from when I was ill a few weeks ago, so I was able to work through that, and hopefully no one noticed. No, thank you very much for coming on, Thorfinn. I appreciate your time. For those of you listening, maybe there's some money that you could claim back there. What more could you want? And I will obviously take some of the money if you manage to get some. Just send me it via PayPal. That'd be great. No. Get in touch with Thorfinn if you think there's anything there. Use the survey that is in the description, and see if you can get something. From what's coming next, episode 96 will be with Rhys Jones, as I said at the start, talking about cattle strength. He's became a PT and sort of uses Instagram to find clients, and it is very much farm based, his gym as well. So a chat I'm quite looking forward to. I've sort of started getting fit over the last 6 months. This will be going out in April. So yeah, 8 months ago I went back to Dumfries, having been on Arran for the summer, and decided to walk 2 or 3k a day. I'm now walking about 13-14k every day, on top of just general life, and trying to hit that 2.5 marathons a week where possible. So fitness has been a big thing, looking at nutrition, looking at all that sort of thing. So looking forward to that chat with Rhys, try and learn some stuff myself. And then, only 3 more episodes before the 100th. So all very exciting. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to what we have in store for the 100th. The clue I gave you in the last episode was, in fact, you have seen them on the podcast before. That is all I'm going to say. I'm not going to give anything more away. So see you next week for episode 96. Thorfinn, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much. Thank you. And see you next week.
I hope you've enjoyed another excellent episode of the R2Kast. I just want to take this moment to quickly thank our primary sponsors once more, A-Plan Rural. If you follow A-Plan on social media, you'll see the work they're doing to really promote British farming and back our industry. It's been a pleasure working alongside A-Plan Rural so far, and long may it continue. The values of A-Plan Rural runs perfectly in line with the whole mantra of Rural to Kitchen, and I'm glad to have them on board. Check them out on Instagram at A-Plan Rural and on Facebook at A-Plan Rural Insurance. See you for the next podcast.